Hello, my name is Wayne Visser and I am founder and director of CSR International, as well as being a senior associate at the University of Cambridge Programme for Sustainability Leadership and a visiting professor at La Trobe University in Australia. Tunde asked me to record a short message for you for your community investment workshop and your CSR Nigeria Banquet. So I'm delighted to do that. I come to you today from Melbourne, although on the day that this will be played, I will be in Singapore. I'm just on a CSR Quest World Tour, where I'm trying to pick up all the best practices from around the world and share them as widely as possible. And I hope very much to include Nigeria in this world tour towards the end of the year. So I wanted to just reflect on a few things to do with corporate social responsibility, community investment, and the like. And what I suppose I want to do is to be somewhat critical of the achievements of community investment and CSR to date. I think we've had roughly 50 years of development, we've had 50 years of CSR, and yet when you look at the progress that we've made on issues of social impact, environmental issues and ethical issues, most of the indicators are still heading in the wrong direction. And I call this the curses of CSR. And there are three curses. The first is the curse of peripheral CSR. This is where community investment or CSR is something that is just on the side of business. It's a purely philanthropic activity that is done to get some public relations or marketing benefits for the company. And the problem with that approach is that it is never truly integrated into the strategy of the firm. And so I would encourage you very much, as you think about your community investment projects, to ask whether they are aligned to the core business of the firm, because it's only that kind of investment that will be truly sustainable in the long term. The second curse that I talk about is the curse of uneconomic CSR. And unfortunately, in our world today, it is still very easy for companies to externalize their costs in terms of social impacts and environmental impacts and still do extremely well economically. And so what we need to do is to work very hard at changing the norms of society and the expectations that we have of business, as well as the legislation, the community pressure that is put on companies, so that it no longer becomes easy for companies just to do marginal or peripheral CSR. The third curse that I speak about is incremental CSR, and I think this is what we've seen over the last 20 years. Admittedly, some remarkable progress has been made by companies, but when you compare this to the scale and urgency of the problems, whether it be poverty or access to sanitation and water or corruption, actually CSR has not made a significant dent in the problems that we're trying to solve. And the problem is that CSR can make us feel as companies quite complacent, and we need to be guarded against that and to be vigilant to really test the effect, the impact of our community investment against things actually happening on the ground. So I talk now about needing to move from an old version of CSR, which I call CSR 1.0, to a new version, which I call CSR 2.0. And the new version is based on 5 principles. So as you reflect on your community investment and your CSR programs, I would ask you to test them against these 5 principles. The first principle is the principle of scalability. Is a company or is a project truly scalable in terms of its impacts, or is it just a once-off ad hoc project that may work in a very tiny setting but is never going to go to the scale that we need it to in order to make a real impact on the social and environmental problems. The second principle is creativity. And because the problems that we face are so difficult, so complex, we can't use, to paraphrase Einstein, the same thinking that we had that created the problem. We need to draw on creative partnerships, on creative social enterprises in order to tackle these problems. So creativity is the second principle. The third principle is responsiveness. And here is where I think there is a great role to play for partnerships in community investment. So are you being truly responsible to the needs of the stakeholders, to the needs of the community? I did some research with Cambridge a few years ago on partnerships, and it was rather sad that we found that most of the partnerships we studied didn't consult the beneficiaries of the projects in order to ask what it is they most needed from those development and community projects. So I would ask you, as you do your CSR initiatives, to really listen to the stakeholders and try and be as responsive to their needs as possible. The fourth principle is something I call glocality. This is not a word I invented, but it means to think global, act local. So you do need in Nigeria to take on board some of the international principles that have been agreed, whether it's through the UN Global Compact or now the new ISO 26000 standard. But more important than that even is to find the local, the Nigerian way to practice CSR that is effective, that is embedded in the culture and the traditions of the country. And as I travel around the world now, I find it increasingly important that CSR is not just seen as an imported concept from the West or something that multinationals put pressure on to do, but actually something that becomes homegrown and local. So to embrace the principle of glocality. The final principle is circularity, and this means to make sure that we close the loops on our production cycles, but also on our relationships. So do you have a relationship with a community that is circular, not something that you go in once and walk away, but something that creates a virtuous cycle, something that commits to the long term, and where you can really see the benefits accruing over time, and eventually where communities can become self-reliant rather than dependent. So I wish you well in your conference, in your deliberations, and especially in implementing these ideas going forward. Nigeria, particularly since 1995, with all of the spotlight that was put on the country and on Shell in Nigeria since then, is really a test case for the world of whether you can truly implement CSR as a method that can make a true difference, a significant difference, or whether it is simply greenwash, whether it is simply something peripheral and marginal and all about public relations. I'm confident that the work that you're doing will help us to prove the case that CSR can make a real difference in the world, and especially in Nigeria. So thank you and good luck. Goodbye.